"I've never wanted anyone this badly," the mountain man declared to the obese girl. In a dusty frontier town, laughter turns cruel as a farm girl is mocked in front of everyone. Then, out of the silence, a mountain man steps forward and shocks the crowd with words no one expected. "I've never wanted anyone this badly." But his bold vow sparks more than whispers. Behind the sneers lurks a powerful rancher, determined to force her into marriage or steal her family's land. And hidden deep in her father's old hymn book lies a secret that could save or destroy the only home she has left. As fire consumes the barn and shadows close in, hearts are tested, faith is shaken, and the line between justice and revenge grows thin. Will this lonely mountain man and the girl no one believed in find the strength to fight for each other? Or will the weight of greed and betrayal tear them apart forever? Every story brings us a little closer together. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. It's a joy to see how far this family of listeners reaches. The mercantile's floorboards creaked under Ephraim's warm boots as his words hung in the air. The usual bustle of the store, the shuffling of feet, the rustle of fabric, the murmur of gossip, all fell silent. His heart hammered against his ribs, matching the tick of the wall clock behind the counter. Mabel Anders stood frozen, her fingers still clutching the bolt of calico she'd been examining. A pink flush crept up her neck to her cheeks, and her eyes, wide with disbelief, met his. They were kind eyes, Ephraim noticed. The soft brown of creek water in autumn barred Crowley's face, twisted from mockery to rage. "What did you say, mountain man?" He took a step forward, spurs jingling against the wooden floor. Ephraim didn't move. The same certainty that had pushed the words from his mouth now kept him rooted firmly in place. "Reckon you heard me just fine." His voice was quiet but carried through the stillness of the store. The scent of beaver pelts and pine needles still clung to his coat, a reminder of the solitary life he'd chosen after losing Sarah and the baby. But something about Mabel's quiet dignity in the face of cruelty had awakened feelings, he'd thought. "Long buried. You think this is funny, Keeler?" Crowley's hand drifted toward his gun belt. "Making sport of a respectable lady? Ain't nothing sporting about what I heard in here." Ephraim's gaze never wavered from Mabel's face. "Miss Anders deserves better than mean-spirited jokes from men who ought to know better." A few of the onlookers shifted uncomfortably, shame finally catching up to their earlier laughter. Mrs. Potter, the milliner's wife, pressed her lips together and looked down at her shoes. Mabel's hands trembled slightly as she set down the fabric. "I should go," she whispered, but her feet didn't move. "No need to leave on account of bad manners," Ephraim said softly. He took off his battered hat, revealing hair still dark despite the silver threading at his temples. "I meant what I said, Miss Anders. There's a grace about you that puts these fancy store goods to shame." Fresh color bloomed in Mabel's cheeks, but she lifted her chin. Years of enduring taunts about her size had taught her to expect mockery. Yet there was nothing but sincerity in the mountain man's weathered face. "You're addled from too much time in them hills," Crowley spat. "Miss Anders here is promised to me, or soon will be. Her mama knows what's best, with that homestead needing a man's touch." Ephraim's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors about Crowley pressuring widows and their daughters, using water rights and cattle drives as leverage. The railroad's expansion had given men like him even more power to squeeze out smaller holdings. "Seems to me," Ephraim said, carefully, "that Miss Anders is doing just fine running that place with her family. Don't need no man's touch that ain't welcome." Mabel's eyes welled with tears, but they weren't tears of shame this time. Something like hope flickered across her face, as if she were seeing herself through new eyes, not as the target of cruel jokes, but as someone worthy of defense and admiration. The store owner, Mr. Jenkins, cleared his throat nervously. "Now, Gentlemen, let's keep things civil. Miss Anders, your order. I'll pay for the lady's goods, Ephraim interrupted, reaching for his leather purse. The winter's trapping had been good, and he had plenty of coin from the pelts he'd already sold. I couldn't possibly, Mabel started to protest. Please, Ephraim said. It would be my honor. The words felt strange in his mouth after so many years of speaking only to his mule and the wilderness, but they came easier than he'd expected. Crowley's face had turned an ugly shade of red. This ain't over, Keeler. You're meddling where you ain't wanted. He stormed out of the store, spurs ringing against the boards like angry bells till the tension in the room eased slightly, though curious eyes still darted between Ephraim and Mabel. She gathered her courage and stepped closer to him, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, Mr. Keeler, not just for speaking up, but for seeing me, really seeing me. Ephraim nodded, his throat tight with emotion he hadn't felt in years. Sometimes, he said quietly, a man needs to be reminded what's worth fighting. For in this world, Ephraim helped Mabel gather the rest of her purchases from the mercantile shelves. Flour, coffee, sugar, and the calico she'd been examining. His rough hands moved with surprising gentleness as he wrapped each item in brown paper. The other customers had drifted away, leaving them in an awkward silence broken only by the rustle of paper and the distant whistle of the afternoon train. Outside the store, Mabel turned to face him, twisting her hands in her apron. Mr. Keeler, what you said in there. Her voice trailed off, uncertainty clear in her eyes. I meant every word, Ephraim said quietly. The late afternoon sun caught the loose strands of her brown hair, making them glow like honey. Can't rightly explain it myself, but sometimes a man just knows when something's true. A hint of a smile touched Mabel's lips, though doubt still shadowed her face. Most folks don't see me that way. They see. She gestured vaguely at herself, at the curves that had made her the target of so many cruel jokes. Most folks don't look proper, Ephraim replied. They see what they expect to see, not what's real. They walked together toward the Anders wagon, where Henry Anders was struggling with a heavy sack of flour. The boy's face was red with effort as he tried to hoist it onto the wagon bed. Here, let me help with that. Ephraim stepped forward, lifting the sack easily onto the wagon. His trapper's strength made light work of what had challenged the 15-year-old boy. Much obliged, mister, Henry said, grinning. You're strong as a bear. Mabel's smile grew wider, more genuine, and something warm stirred in Ephraim's chest at the sight. But the moment was broken by the weight of a hostile stare. Near the saloon, Bart Crowley lounged against a hitching post, his eyes hard as he watched them. His fancy vest and polished boots marked him as a man used to getting his way. We should be heading home, Mabel said softly, glancing nervously at Crowley. Unless... Would you care to join us for supper, Mr. Keeler? It's the least we can offer. After your kindness today. Ephraim hesitated only a moment before nodding. I'd be honored. Truth was, he was curious to see where this gentle woman called home. The wagon ride to the Anders farm took them through rolling grassland. The spring, mud sucking at the wheels. The setting sun painted the clouds in shades of pink and gold, while meadowlarks called their evening songs. Ephraim rode his mule alongside, watching how Mabel handled the reins with quiet confidence. The farmhouse came into view as they crested. A small rise, a modest structure of weathered boards with a vegetable garden to one side and a barn that needed minor repairs. Smoke curled from the chimney, and lamplight glowed in the windows. Promising warmth within doubt, Mrs. Anders met them at the door, a thin woman with gray-streaked hair and worried eyes. She greeted Ephraim with careful politeness, her gaze taking in his buckskins and the knife at his belt. Inside, the house was small but clean, filled with the aroma of rabbit stew and fresh bread. They gathered around the worn table, and Ephraim noticed the empty chair, where Mabel's father must have sat before his passing down as they ate. The conversation turned from pleasant small talk to more serious matters. Mabel's hands shook slightly as she set down her spoon. "Mother, I think Mr. Keeler should know about the railroad man." Mrs. Anders sighed heavily. "Mr. Hawley, the railroad agent, claims our water rights papers were properly filed after my husband died. Says there's no record of our claim to the creek. But that ain't right," Henry protested. "Pa filed everything proper. I remember going to town with him." "Without those papers," Mabel explained, her voice tight with worry, "we could lose everything. The creek waters our crops, keeps our animals alive. Without it—" She didn't need to finish the thought. Ephraim's jaw clenched. He'd seen this before. Paper tricks used to steal land from those who'd worked it honest. The railroad had done the same to Ute families he knew, claiming treaties were lost or incorrectly filed. "They're trying to pressure us to sell," Mrs. Anders added quietly. "Mr. Crowley's offered to buy, but his price is insultingly low. And his other suggestions." She glanced at Mabel, who looked down at her plate. The warmth of the kitchen seemed to fade as Ephraim understood the full picture. His impulsive words in the store had done more than defend a woman's dignity. They'd drawn him into a fight against men who used paper and laws to steal what they couldn't take by force. Later, bedded down in the barn loft with clean straw for a mattress, Ephraim stared at the rafters above. The scent of hay and leather filled his nostrils, while somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. His declaration in the store no longer seemed so simple. He'd stepped into something bigger than himself, a battle between honest folk trying to hold on to their land and men who twist any law to take it. Dawn painted the sky in soft pastels as Ephraim made his way from the barn to the woodpile. The morning air was crisp, his breath visible in small clouds. Henry was already there, struggling with a particularly stubborn piece of oak. "Here, let me show you," Ephraim said quietly, taking the axe. "You want to find the grain, see? Follow nature's path." He demonstrated, the axe splitting the wood with practiced ease. Henry watched intently, eager to learn. Pa used to say something similar about farming, working with the land, not against it. They fell into a steady rhythm, Ephraim splitting, Henry stacking. From the kitchen window, Mabel watched them work. There was something different about Ephraim, she thought. No swagger, no showing off. Just quiet competence and gentle guidance with Henry. The smell of coffee and frying bacon drew them inside. Mrs. Anders had the table set, biscuits steaming in a cloth-covered basket. As they settled in to eat, she poured coffee with trembling hands. "There's something you should know, Mr. Keeler," Mrs. Anders said, her voice tight. "About Mr. Crowley's interest in our land." Mabel's cheeks flushed red. "Mother, please." "No, daughter. He needs to understand." Mrs. Anders squared her shoulders. "Mr. Crowley made what he calls a solution. He says if Mabel agrees to marry him, he'll make sure our water rights are secured. He has connections with the railroad office." The biscuit in Ephraim's hand crumbled. As his fingers tightened, did he now? Mabel wouldn't meet his eyes. I considered it. For Mother and Henry's sake, we need that water. Without it, everything Father worked for." Her voice cracked. "No." Ephraim's voice was low but firm. "Crowley ain't to be trusted. Man like that, using threats to force a woman's hand. He'd never treat you right. Never treat this land right neither. But what choice do we have?" Mrs. Anders asked. "Let me look into it." Ephraim pushed back from the table. "I'm riding into town. Something about this whole business don't sit right." The railroad office was a new building near the depot, all fresh paint and polished brass. Inside, the clerk, Mr. Hawley, sat behind a desk piled with papers. His suit was expensive, his manner cold. "The Anders water rights?" Hawley shuffled through some documents with exaggerated care. Ah, yes, most unfortunate. The deed is incomplete. Missing signatures, improper filing. Cannot possibly be honored. Mind if I see these incomplete papers? Ephraim asked. That would be quite irregular. Hale's smile didn't reach his eyes. Railroad company policy, you understand. Confidential matters. Seems mighty convenient. Papers missing just when a certain rancher wants that land. Are you suggesting impropriety, mister? Keeler. And I'm suggesting nothing. Just noting facts. Well, Mr. Keeler, unless you have legal standing in this matter, I believe we're finished here. Back at the Anders farm by mid-afternoon, Ephraim found Mabel in the kitchen, kneading bread. Her hands were dusted with flour, a streak of it across her cheek. That railroad man's hiding something, he said. We need to find your father's papers. The original deed, any copies he might have made. We've looked everywhere, Mabel sighed. Maybe not everywhere. Your father was a careful man, wasn't he? Might have tucked something away safe, just in case. That evening, after supper, they gathered in the sitting room. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Henry sat cross-legged. On the floor, the family Bible open on his lap. Pa used to read every evening, he said, turning the well-worn pages. His young voice rose and fell with the familiar words. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Ephraim found himself listening intently. He'd avoided churches and scripture since losing his wife and child, but something in Mabel's quiet faith touched him. He watched her face. In the firelight as she mouthed the words along with Henry, her eyes closed in peaceful conviction. Later, lying in the barn loft, Ephraim stared into the darkness. The sweet smell of hay surrounded him, and somewhere in the rafters, a barn owl rustled its wings. His life of trapping suddenly seemed empty, endless wandering, trading pelts for supplies, sleeping alone under stars that gave no answers. Here was something different. People who needed help, a woman whose gentle strength moved him, and maybe even a chance to believe in something bigger than himself. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Ephraim met Mabel and Henry in the farmhouse kitchen, where breakfast dishes had already been cleared away. A determined look settled on Mabel's face as she led them to her father's old study. We should start here, she said, pulling open the desk drawers. Pa kept most of his important papers in this desk. Ephraim nodded, watching as Henry dropped to his knees to check the lower compartments. The morning light streamed through dusty windows, highlighting the worn leather chair where Mabel's father had once kept the farm's accounts. Your father seems like he was an organized man, Ephraim observed, noting the neat stacks of receipts and carefully labeled folders. He was, Mabel replied softly. Everything had its place. She pulled open another drawer, rifling through yellowed papers and old letters. They worked methodically through the morning. Ephraim checked behind pictures on the walls, while Henry climbed on a chair to reach high shelves. Mabel opened an old trunk in the corner, the hinges creaking with age. Look here, she called out, lifting a leather-bound book. Pa's old hymn book. She opened it carefully, and loose papers fluttered to the floor. Ephraim helped her gather them up, their hands briefly touching over a faded sheet of music. There's writing in the margins, Mabel noted, studying the hymn book's pages. Her fingers traced her father's familiar script, notes about scripture, thoughts on the meaning of verses, but no deed. Don't lose heart, Ephraim said gently. Frontier folks, they learn to be clever about hiding important papers. I've known families who stored deeds in false Bible covers or hollow chair legs. They searched through cupboards and cabinets, behind loose floorboards, and inside old boots. By midday, they had turned up letters, photographs, and farming records, but nothing about the water rights. Let's take a break, Ephraim suggested, seeing the frustration in Mabel's eyes. "Henry, come help me in the barn. I'll show you how to mend that broken bridle." In the barn's cool shade, Ephraim laid out his tools and the worn leather tack. Henry watched eagerly as Ephraim demonstrated how to punch new holes and secure the stitching. "Steady hands now," Ephraim instructed, guiding Henry's movements. "Too tight and the leather will tear. Too loose and it won't hold." Through the barn's open door, he could see Mabel in the kitchen window, her strong arms working bread dough on the wooden counter. She paused occasionally to watch them, a small smile playing at her lips when Henry successfully threaded the leather needle. The afternoon light was fading when they finished the repairs. Henry proudly showed his mother and sister the mended bridle, earning praise for his neat stitching. That evening, they gathered in the sitting room. A single lamp cast a warm glow as Mabel donned socks and Henry played with a carved wooden horse. The comfortable silence was broken when Mabel looked up at Ephraim. "May I ask you something?" she said softly. "Why do you live alone up in the mountains?" Ephraim's hand stilled in his lap. He stared into the shadows for a long moment before speaking. "Had a family once," he said, his voice rough. "A wife, Sarah, and a little girl, Grace." He swallowed hard. Fever took them both 6 years ago. One week they were fine. Next week, he trailed off, the pain still sharp after all this time. The room fell silent. Even Henry set down his toy, sensing the weight of the moment. Mabel's needle hung suspended over her work, a thread of grief connecting them all. "I am so sorry for your loss," Mabel said quietly. Her words were simple, but they held a depth of understanding that touched something in Ephraim's heart that no one had acknowledged his grief quite like that before. Most people offered awkward platitudes or changed the subject. But Mabel's gentle words made space for his pain without trying to fix it. The lamp flickered lower, shadows deepening in the corners of the room. Yet something else was growing in that quiet space. A tender trust, unspoken but real. Ephraim felt it in the way Mabel's eyes met his with quiet compassion, in the respectful silence Henry maintained, in the peaceful atmosphere that settled over them all as the evening wore on. None of them felt the need to break that precious silence with unnecessary words. Some things were better understood in the spaces between breaths, in the shared warmth of a room where grief could be honored and healing could begin. The wagon wheels creaked over the muddy trail as Mabel and Ephraim made their way toward town. The morning sun had burned away the early mist, revealing patches of melting snow between the pines. Wooden crates filled with fresh eggs nestled beneath a quilt in the wagon bed, alongside crocks of butter wrapped in muslin. Ephraim held the reins loosely, letting the horses pick their way around the deeper ruts. He glanced at Mabel beside him on the seat, noticing how the spring sunlight caught the auburn highlights in her brown hair. "Hold up now," he said, drawing the horses to a stop. "Come look at this." He climbed down and offered his hand to help Mabel from the wagon. "What is it?" she asked, following him to the edge of the trail. Ephraim pointed to marks in the soft mud. "Deer tracks, fresh from this morning. See how clear the prints are." He traced the outline with his finger. "And over there, that's a rabbit burrow." The snow melting shows all kinds of sign if you know how to read it. "Like tracking letters in the mud," Mabel mused, crouching down for a better look. "Exactly so," Ephraim chuckled. "Though I reckon these letters spell out breakfast more often than not." Mabel laughed, a warm sound that echoed through the trees. "You sound just like my father. He could always find humor in the simplest things." They continued toward town, with Ephraim pointing out more signs of wildlife: a fox's distinctive paw prints, turkey scratches near a fallen log. Mabel found herself relaxing in his company, drawn to his quiet strength and rough-hewn wisdom. The peaceful mood shattered as they approached the mercantile. Bart Crowley lounged against the hitching post, his expensive boots crossed at the ankle. His eyes narrowed as Ephraim helped Mabel down from the wagon. "Well, if it ain't the mountain stray," Crowley drawled, pushing away from the post. "Still, sniffing around where you don't belong?" Ephraim positioned himself between Crowley and Mabel. "We've got business to tend to," he said firmly. "Business?" Crowley sneered. "The only business that matters is what I offered before." He turned his attention to Mabel. "My offer still stands, girl. Marry me, and your family keeps the farm. Simple as that." "There's nothing simple about stealing land," Ephraim growled. "Stealing?" Crowley's laugh held no warmth. "Everything's legal and proper. Ain't my fault if important papers go missing in county offices." "The law will have something to say about that," Ephraim warned. Crowley's smirk widened. "The law belongs to men. With money, mountain man. Best remember that before you go poking into things that don't concern you." He tipped his hat mockingly to Mabel and sauntered away, spurs jingling with each step. Mabel's hands trembled as she arranged her goods on the mercantile counter. "He means it," she whispered. "About the law. Half the county board owes him favors or money." "There's more than one kind of justice," Ephraim replied quietly, helping her wrap the butter for customers. They completed their trading in tense silence, then headed back to the farm as afternoon clouds gathered overhead. The wagon seemed heavier. On the return journey, weighted down with unspoken fears. That evening, after the chores were done, Mabel found Ephraim on the porch. He was whittling a piece of pine, his knife stroke sure and steady in the fading light. "My faith is failing me," she admitted, settling onto the step beside him. "How can God allow a man like Crowley to prosper while good people suffer?" Ephraim set aside his whittling. "Justice isn't always found in courtrooms or county boards," he said carefully. "Sometimes it's found in standing firm and refusing to let evil men win through fear." "But what if standing firm isn't enough?" Mabel's voice quavered. "What if we never find past papers?" "Then we'll find another way," Ephraim assured her. "Your father was a careful man. Those papers are somewhere, waiting to be found. We just have to keep looking." The evening breeze carried the scent of spring earth and melting snow. In the distance, a whippoorwill called, its lonely song echoing across the darkening fields. Mabel drew her shawl tighter, finding comfort in Ephraim's steady presence beside her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for standing with us today." Ephraim nodded, his eyes on the purple shadows gathering in the valley below. He didn't need to say that he would stand with her tomorrow too, and all the tomorrows after that. Some promises were better kept in actions than in words. The sun peeked over the eastern hills, painting the frost-covered grass in shades of gold. Ephraim and young Henry rode along the fence line, their horse's breath visible in the crisp morning air. Henry sat tall in his saddle, eager to learn from the mountain man who had become a steady presence at their farm. "Posts need checking after the spring thaw," Ephraim explained, dismounting to test a weathered fence post. "Ground shifts with the malt, loosens things up." Back at the farmhouse, Mabel took advantage of the quiet morning to search once more. She moved methodically through each room, checking behind pictures and inside old books. In her father's study, she found a wooden box filled with correspondence. Her hands trembled as she unfolded a yellowed letter. The familiar sight of her father's careful handwriting brought tears to her eyes. The letter was addressed to Preacher Williams, dated 2 summers ago. "Dear friend," she read aloud, "I trust this finds you well. Thank you for your counsel regarding the water rights. As discussed, I have secured the papers safely. The hymn book holds more than songs these days." Mabel's heart skipped. The family hymn book. They had searched it yesterday, but had they looked closely enough? She hurried to the parlor where the worn leather book lay on the side table. Running her fingers over its cover, she noticed how stiff it felt. Not like normal leather at all, Dodd. When hoofbeats announced the men's return, Mabel rushed outside, letter clutched in her hand. "Ephraim, Henry, Come quick." They gathered around the kitchen table as Mabel read the letter aloud. Ephraim picked up the hymn book, turning it carefully in his large hands. His fingers found a slight gap in the binding. "Your father was clever," he said softly. "Mind if I take a closer look?" Mabel nodded, watching as he examined the book's spine. With gentle pressure, he worked his thumbnail along a nearly invisible seam. The leather covering separated, revealing a hollow space within the cover. "There," Ephraim breathed, easing out several folded papers. Mabel's hand shook as she opened the first document. "Water rights and deed to 160 acres," she read, voice breaking. "In the name of Thomas Anders. Pa had it all along." Henry whispered, eyes wide. Relief washed over Mabel's face. Without thinking, she threw her arms around her brother, hugging him tight. Then, shyly, she turned to Ephraim. Her embrace was tentative at first, but he returned it gently, his strong arms steady around her. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest, "for believing it was here." Ephraim cleared his throat, stepping back carefully. "Your father knew what he was about," he said gruffly, though his eyes were soft. That evening, the kitchen was warm. With celebration, Mrs. Anders prepared a feast of roast chicken, dumplings, and apple pie. The good dishes came out, and even Henry was allowed a small cup of coffee after supper. While Mrs. Anders put Henry to bed, Mabel and Ephraim remained at the kitchen table. She mended a torn apron by lamplight while he cleaned his pipe, neither feeling the need to fill the comfortable silence with words. "Could you pass the thread?" Mabel asked softly. As Ephraim reached for the spool, their fingers brushed. The touch lingered, warm and electric. Mabel's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't pull away. Time seemed to slow, measured only by the gentle tick of the mantel clock and their quiet breathing. The moment broke when a train whistled in the distance, its lonely sound echoing across the valley. Mabel's fingers tightened on her needle, remembering that finding the deed was just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new battles with the railroad men and Bart Crowley. But tonight, in the lamp-lit kitchen with Ephraim's solid presence beside her, Mabel let herself feel hope. The sound of his pipe being tamped, the whisper of thread through fabric, the crackle of the cooking fire. These simple things felt like promises of home and strength and possibilities yet to come. Dawn painted the eastern sky in soft pinks and golds as Ephraim readied his mule in the Anders barn. His fingers worked quickly but carefully, checking each buckle and strap of the saddle. The precious deed, wrapped in clean cotton cloth, lay secure in his saddlebag. Mabel appeared in the barn doorway, already dressed for town in her blue calico dress and neat bonnet. Her face showed a mix of hope and worry as she watched Ephraim prepare for their journey. "Morning," she said softly, holding out a tin of fresh biscuits. "Thought you might want something warm for the ride." Ephraim accepted the tin with a grateful nod. "Much obliged. Your Mari's ready too." He gestured to where he'd already saddled her horse. The spring morning was crisp as they rode toward town, frost still clinging to the grass in shadowed places. Their horses' hooves made steady rhythms on the packed dirt road. Neither spoke much, both aware of what hung in the balance. The railroad office sat squat and official near the depot, its fresh paint a stark contrast to the weathered buildings around it. Inside, the agent, Mr. Holly, barely looked up from his ledger as they entered. "We ain't buying homesteads today," he drawled, his pen scratching across paper. "Not selling," Ephraim stated firmly. He unwrapped the deed and placed it on the desk. Anders' water rights and property deed. Complete and proper. The agent's expression soured as he examined the document. His fingers moved over the paper slowly, searching for flaws. Finding none, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Well," he said finally, "this appears legitimate, though it will need proper filing with the county clerk." He shuffled some papers on his desk, Filing day is next Thursday. Document must be presented then, or it holds no weight. Mabel's hands twisted in her skirt. But you'll note that we showed it to you? That the claim is real? I'll make note, Holly replied grudgingly. Though until it's filed proper, nothing's certain. As they left the office, Ephraim's sharp eyes caught movement on the saloon porch. Bart Crowley stood there, one boot propped on the rail, watching them with barely concealed anger. His jaw was tight, and his hand rested near his gun belt. Ephraim shifted slightly, placing himself between Crowley and Mabel. The ride home was tense, both of them aware of what still lay ahead. The late morning sun had burned away the frost, leaving the air warm and heavy with spring scents. That evening, they sat together on the farmhouse porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. From somewhere in the pasture came the gentle lowing of cattle being settled for the night. I'm scared, Mabel admitted quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Bart Crowley isn't the type to give up easy, not when he wants something. Ephraim nodded slowly. Reckon you're right about that. He pulled out his pipe, tamping it thoughtfully. But I give you my word, I'll keep that deed safe until filing day. Won't let it out of my sight. Mabel's shoulders relaxed slightly at his words. I believe. You, she said softly. They sat in comfortable silence as dusk deepened around them. The first stars appeared, bright pinpricks in the darkening sky. A whippoorwill called from the creek bottom, its song lonely and sweet. Ephraim found his thoughts. Wandering down paths he hadn't allowed himself to explore in years. The warmth of a shared home, children's laughter in the yard, a wife's smile across the breakfast table. His heart had been closed tight since losing Sarah and their baby girl. But now he glanced at Mabel, seeing how the last rays of sunset caught the gold in her hair. She was nothing like Sarah. Where his first wife had been slight and quick, Mabel was substantial, steady as the earth itself. Yet there was a gentleness to her that called to something deep in his soul. Mabel felt. His gaze in turn to meet it. In the gathering darkness, her eyes held a warmth that made his breath catch. She didn't look away, and in that moment, something shifted between them. A possibility. A future. The screen door creaked as Mrs. Anders stepped out. Mabel. Henry's. Asking for his story before bed. Coming, Mama. Mabel stood, smoothing her skirt. She paused, looking down at Ephraim. Thank you. For everything. He nodded, unable to find words for all he wanted to say. As she went inside, Ephraim remained on the porch, smoking his pipe and watching the stars emerge. For the first time in more years than he could count, he let himself dream of tomorrow. Soft white flakes drifted down from pearl-gray skies as the week crept forward. The late winter storm brought a biting chill that had everyone pulling their coats tighter. Inside the Anders barn, Ephraim showed Henry how to splice a broken fence wire, his big hands gentle as he guided the boy's smaller ones. That's it, Ephraim said, watching Henry twist the metal strands together. Make it good and tight now. Cattle test any weak spot they find. Henry's face scrunched in concentration as he worked. Like this? Just right. Ephraim nodded approvingly. Your pay would be proud of such fine work. They spent the morning repairing winter damage along the fence lines, Henry soaking up Ephraim's quiet instruction like dry earth drinks rain. When they returned to stack firewood near the house, Mabel brought them steaming cups of coffee. Mama says another cold spell's coming, she said, watching the snow swirl. Says she can feel it in her bones. Reckon she's right, Ephraim agreed. Best to be prepared. As dusk approached that evening, Ephraim led Mabel behind the barn where he'd set up some tin cans on a fallen log. He pulled a small pistol from his coat pocket, checking it carefully before holding it out to her. It's lighter than my father's old rifle, Mabel said, taking the gun with hesitant hands. Easier to handle, too. Ephraim moved behind her, adjusting. A grip. Keep both hands firm like this. Sight down the barrel at your target. Mabel's breath clouded in the cold air as she aimed. The first shot went wide, making her jump at the noise. But Ephraim's steady presence at her back gave her courage to try again. Take your time, he murmured. Breathe slow and squeeze gentle. Don't pull. The second shot pinned off one of the cans, sending it spinning. Mabel's eyes widened in surprise. I did it! She turned to Ephraim with a bright smile that warmed him more than any fire could. Known you had it in you all along, he said softly. Just needed to believe in yourself a bit. They practiced until the light began to fade, Mabel's confidence growing with each successful shot. When they finally headed inside, her cheeks were pink from cold and pride. The next evening found them all gathered in the barn's warm shadows. Lantern light cast a gentle glow over their small circle. Mabel, her mother, Henry, and Ephraim. The familiar sense of hay and leather surrounded them as Mrs. Anders opened the family Bible. Lord, she began, her voice steady and clear, we ask for your protection tomorrow as we set things right. Guide our path and guard our steps. Ephraim bowed his head, moved by their simple faith. He hadn't prayed proper since losing his family, but something about these people made him want to try again. Henry's young voice joined in, then Mabel's soft one. Their words rose together in the lantern-lit darkness, full of hope and trust. When the final amen faded, they sat quiet for a moment, drawing strength from each other's presence. As Mrs. Anders and Henry headed back to the house, Mabel lingered. She turned to Ephraim, her eyes bright in the dim light. I never properly thanked you, she whispered, for believing in us. In me. She stood close enough that Ephraim could see the tiny snowflakes melting in her hair. His heart thundered against his ribs as he looked down at her upturned face. The urge to kiss her nearly overwhelmed him, to taste the sweetness he saw in her gentle smile. But fear held him back. Fear of rushing her, of somehow tainting this precious trust growing between them. Instead, he touched her hand briefly. No thanks needed. What's right is right. Mabel's fingers squeezed his before she turned away, following her family's lantern toward the house. Ephraim watched until they were safely inside, then began preparing his bedroll in the barn loft. He carefully wrapped the deed in oilcloth before tucking it deep inside his blankets. The precious paper represented more than just land now. It held Mabel's future, her family's security, their shared hopes. Outside, the snow continued falling. Wind whispered around the barn's weathered walls, and somewhere in the darkness, unseen figures moved like shadows through the storm. But Ephraim, focused on his preparations for tomorrow's journey, remained unaware of the danger closing in. Near midnight, Ephraim jolted awake to the acrid smell of smoke. Shouts pierced the darkness outside the barn, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Orange light flickered through the slats, and his heart froze fire. Henry, he bellowed, scrambling down from the loft. The boy had fallen asleep in the hay after their evening prayers. Heat pressed against Ephraim's face as flames licked up the barn's outer walls. Smoke rolled thick near the ceiling as Ephraim spotted Henry curled up in the corner. He scooped the boy into his arms, just as a burning beam crashed down where they'd been standing. Henry coughed and stirred, eyes wide with terror. Hold on to me, Ephraim commanded, shielding the boy's face against his chest. They stumbled toward the barn door through the thickening smoke. Behind them, the fire roared louder, feeding on dry hay and ancient timber. Outside, Mabel's scream cut through the chaos. Henry! Ephraim! They burst through the door into the snowy night. Ephraim's lungs burned as he set Henry down, but relief turned to horror as the boy cried out in pain. An angry red burn marked Henry's forearm where a falling ember had struck him The deed. Ephraim spun back toward the barn, but Mabel grabbed his arm. No, it's too dangerous. The roof groaned, timbers splitting like rifle shots. Ephraim watched helplessly as flames devoured the loft where his bedroll and the precious deed lay hidden. Mrs. Anders ran from the house with buckets, and they formed a desperate chain to the well. But the fire was too fierce. With a thunderous crash, the roof collapsed inward. Sparks exploded skyward like bitter stars. The heat drove them back as the barn became an inferno, painting the snow-covered yard in hellish light. Through the chaos, Ephraim caught glimpses of riders moving in the darkness beyond the firelight. His gut twisted with certainty Crowley's. Men. They'd waited until the family was vulnerable, then struck like snakes stopped by dawn. Only smoking ruins remained. The morning light revealed the full extent of their loss. The barn was nothing but ash and blackened beams. Their livestock had scattered in terror, leaving trampled snow and silence. Ephraim searched the ruins once they'd cooled enough, but found only burned scraps of his bedroll. The deed was gone stolen, not destroyed. He'd failed to protect it, failed to protect them all. Mabel stood in the yard, her face streaked with soot and tears as she bandaged Henry's arm. The boy tried not to cry as she applied salve to the burn, but his lips trembled. "I'm sorry," Ephraim said, his voice rough with smoke and shame. "I should have." "Don't." Mabel cut him off, not meeting his eyes. She finished wrapping Henry's arm and sent him inside with their mother. When they were alone, she spoke so quietly. Ephraim had to strain to hear. "Crowley will be here soon with his offer again." Her shoulders slumped. "Without the deed, without the barn." She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "If marrying him saves this land from my family, I'll do what I must." "Mabel, no." Ephraim stepped toward her, but she backed away. "What choice do I have?" Her voice cracked. "Winter's not done. We need shelter for what livestock we can find. Henry's hurt. Mama's not young anymore. I can't watch them suffer when there's a way to help, even if—" She pressed her lips together, holding back tears. Shame and bitterness rose like bile in Ephraim's throat. He'd promised to protect them, promised to help save their land. Instead, he brought destruction down on their heads. The familiar urge to flee clawed at him to vanish into the high country where he couldn't hurt anyone else. "I understand," he said, though the words felt like stones in his mouth. He turned away, unable to bear the defeat in Mabel's eyes. "I'll go." She didn't call after him as he walked to where his mule was tethered. The animal had survived the fire, spooked but unharmed. Ephraim mounted up, his rifle across his lap, and pointed the mule's head toward the mountains. Fresh snow had begun, falling as if nature herself wanted to erase all trace of the night's violence. He didn't look back at the farmhouse, at the smoking ruin of the barn, at Mabel standing alone in the yard. The cold wind numbed his face as he rode, but couldn't touch the ache in his chest. Once again, he dared to reach for happiness. Once again, he'd failed to hold on to it. The mountain trails beckoned, promising solitude and forgetfulness. Ephraim urged his mule faster, trying to outrun his shame, his grief, his longing for what might have been. Behind him, the falling snow slowly buried his tracks, erasing his path back to warmth and hope. The mountain wind howled through bare branches, carrying stinging pellets of snow. Ephraim huddled closer to his small fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the granite. Cliff faced behind him. 2 days had passed since he'd fled the Anders farm. Yet the image of Mabel's defeated eyes haunted him like a fever dream. His hands worked mechanically, scraping a rabbit hide while his thoughts churned. The familiar motions brought little comfort. Up here among the towering pines, where the air grew thin and the world fell away, he'd always found peace before. But now the solitude felt hollow, an empty echo of his shame. The rabbit hide slipped, and Ephraim's knife cut too deep, ruining the pelt. With a curse, he flung both hide and blade into the snow. Anger burned in his chest, at Crowley, at himself, at a world that let the powerful prey on the weak. He'd seen it before, watched helplessly as treaties were broken and tribal lands stolen through paper tricks and false promises. Never again, he'd sworn after his wife and child died, retreating to these heights where no one's pain could touch him. Yet here he was, heart torn open once more, having failed another family who trusted him. The fire popped, sending sparks swirling up toward the darkening sky. Ephraim pulled his wool coat tighter, remembering how Mabel had mended its torn sleeve just days ago. Huh? Her gentle hands, her quiet strength, the way she'd looked at him like he was worth something. A twig snapped in the gathering dusk. Ephraim's hand flew to his rifle, but a familiar voice stopped him. Your fire speaks too loud, brother. I could track you from 3 ridges away. Henry Tall Elk emerged from the shadows, his weathered face grave beneath his broad-brimmed hat. The Ute elder moved with the quiet grace of a mountain cat, settling beside the fire without invitation. He pulled out his pipe, packed it with tobacco, and lit it from a burning twig. Ephraim said nothing, shame and relief warring in his chest. Tall Elk had known him since before the fever took his family, had helped him survive that first bitter winter alone. The elder took several long draws on his pipe before speaking again. I heard about the barn burning. Smoke curled from his lips into the cold air. And the girl's paper being stolen. Crowley's men, Ephraim spat. But I can't. Prove it? Ah. Tall Elk nodded slowly. So you run away, like a deer from wolves. The words stung like a whip. What else could I do? I promised to protect them, and instead you hide in the high places, nursing your wounds while others suffer. The elder's voice carried. No judgment, only quiet certainty. My people know this story well. When the strong take from the weak using paper and lies, many warriors wish to fight with guns and anger. But true warriors don't run, they stand. Stand. Ephraim's laugh was bitter. Against men like Crowley? Against their money and their laws? Against their lies. Tall Elk tapped his pipe against a stone. Truth is like water wearing away stone. Slow, yes, but it cannot be stopped forever. He turned, fixing Ephraim with dark eyes that seemed to see straight through him. The question is not what you can do, brother. It is what you will do. The words hung in the frigid air. Ephraim stared into the flames, remembering Henry's burned arm, Mabel's quiet courage, her mother's fierce determination to hold on to their land. He thought of his own wife and child, taken not by violence, but by a fever he couldn't fight. I don't know how to fight with truth, he admitted finally. Only with anger. Then, perhaps, Tall Elk said softly, it is time to ask the one who made both truth and justice for guidance. The elder rose, gathering his blanket around his shoulders. I will leave you to your prayers, brother. Dawn will show you the path, if you have eyes to see it. He melted into the darkness as silently as he'd come, leaving Ephraim alone with the dying fire in his thoughts. Prayer. How long had it been since he'd truly prayed? Since he'd believed anyone was listening? Yet as the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Ephraim found himself on his knees in the snow. Words came haltingly at first, then faster, pouring out like spring melt his anger, his fear, his longing to make things right. He prayed until his voice grew hoarse and his legs went numb, asking for wisdom, for courage, for a way to fight that didn't end in more destruction. The eastern sky was just beginning to pale when clarity came, not in thunder or visions, but in the quiet certainty that filled his heart. He knew what he had to do. The path ahead would not be easy, but he could no longer hide in these heights while others suffered below. As the first ray of sun struck the mountaintop, Ephraim was already breaking camp, preparing for the ride back to Millstone. Back to Mabel. Back to stand for truth, whatever the cost. The evening shadows stretched long across the Anders farmyard, as Mabel wrung out a cool cloth in the kitchen basin. Through the window, she could see fresh snow beginning to fall, dusting the blackened ruins of their barn. The sight made her stomach clench with despair. "Hold still now, Henry," she murmured, turning back to dab at her brother's burned arm. The angry red welts made her want to weep, but she kept her voice steady. "We need to keep it clean." Henry winced but didn't pull away. His young face was drawn with pain and exhaustion. "I should have fought harder, Mabel. Should have stopped them. Somehow. Hush now." Their mother spoke from where she stirred a pot of healing salve on the cook stove. "You did all you could. We're blessed you made it out alive." Mabel's hands trembled as she wrapped fresh bandages around Henry's arm. The cloth was one of their last clean strips. Like so much else, their medical supplies had been stored in the barn. Everything was slipping away, piece by piece. "I'll write to Mr. Crowley tomorrow," she said quietly. "Tell him I accept his offer." "Mabel, no." Henry tried to stand, but fell back with a grimace. "We have no choice." She tied off the bandage, avoiding their eyes. "Without the deed, we'll lose everything. At least this way." A knock at the door cut through her words. Mrs. Anders reached for the shotgun they now kept loaded by the stove, but Mabel recognized the rhythm of the knock. Her heart leaped even as she told herself not to hope. She opened the door to find Ephraim standing there, snow dusting his broad shoulders. His face was weathered and weary, but his eyes held a fierce determination she hadn't seen before. "May I come in?" he asked softly. Mabel stepped back, warmth flooding her chest despite her resolve to stay distant. He stamped the snow from his boots and entered, nodding respectfully to Mrs. Anders. "I owe you all an apology," he began, but Mabel's mother waved it away. "You risked everything trying to help us. There's no debt between friends." Ephraim's expression tightened. "There's something I should have told you sooner." He turned to Mabel, his voice rough with emotion. "Something about your father." Mabel sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly weak. "What about Papa? I knew him before the fever took him." Ephraim pulled off his hat, turning it in his hands. "I was passing through that spring, trading pelts. He was sick already, worried about leaving you all unprotected." The room grew very still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "He knew there were men who'd try to take the land if they could," Ephraim continued. "Asked me to safeguard something. A second copy of the deed." "What?" Mabel's mother gasped. "That's impossible. James only filed one deed." "No, ma'am." "He was wiser than that. Made 2 copies, had them both certified." Ephraim's eyes never left Mabel's face. "Asked me to hide the second where no corruption could touch it. It's in my cabin, up in the high country." Hope blazed in Mabel's chest, so bright it hurt. "You're certain? After all these years?" Ephraim nodded. "Wrapped in oilcloth, sealed in a tin box beneath my hearthstone. Your father knew men like Crowley. Would come someday. Said his children's children would work this land, if he had any say in it." Tears spilled down Mabel's cheeks. She could hear her father's voice in those words, his fierce love for the land and his family. "We have to get it, before filing day ends tomorrow." "It's a hard ride," Ephraim warned, "especially in snow." "I'm coming with you." Mabel stood, already reaching for her shawl. "I won't stay here waiting while our last chance slips away." "Mabel," her mother began. "Please, Mama, I have to do this." Mrs. Anders studied her daughter's face for a long moment, then nodded. "Take my heavy coat and the wool blanket from my bed." She turned to Ephraim, her expression stern. "You'll protect her?" "With my life, ma'am." They worked quickly, gathering supplies while Henry watched from his chair, frustrated at being unable to help. Mabel packed bread and dried meat, filled water skins, found extra socks and mittens. Her mother insisted on brewing coffee to fill a jar, something warm for the journey. As the eastern sky began to lighten, they stood ready by Ephraim's mule and Mabel's sturdy pony. The snow was falling steadily now, thick flakes swirling in the pre-dawn gloom. Mabel hugged her mother and brother tightly, trying not to think about all that could go wrong. "We'll be back before dark," she promised, with the deed. Ephraim helped her mount, his hands steady and sure. As they rode out, Mabel glanced back one last time. Her mother stood in the doorway, Henry beside her, both of them pale but straight-backed against the darkness. She lifted her hand in farewell, then turned to face the trail ahead. They had a mountain to climb, and time was running out. The mountain trail grew steeper as Ephraim and Mabel climbed higher into the wilderness. Fresh snow lay thick on the ground, making each step treacherous for their mounts. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pines, and their breath came out in white clouds. "Whoa there," Ephraim called softly as his mule stumbled on hidden rocks. He dismounted to lead the animal around a particularly steep bend. "Best we walk them through this stretch." Mabel nodded, sliding carefully from her pony. Her legs trembled from hours in the saddle, and her cheeks stung from the biting wind. Still, she pressed forward, one step at a time. "How much further?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's an old hunting shack about a mile ahead." Ephraim glanced at the darkening sky. "We'll shelter there tonight. The cabin's another 4 hours beyond, but it's too dangerous to push through in darkness." They trudged onward through deepening snow. Mabel's boots were soaked through, her fingers numb despite thick mittens. She focused on Ephraim's broad back. Ahead of her, drawing strength from his unwavering determination, the hunting shack appeared just as twilight, settled in a low structure of rough logs, nearly buried in drifts. Ephraim dug out the door, while Mabel gathered armfuls of dry pine branches for bedding. Inside, the cabin was crude but sound, with a small stone fireplace and a wooden platform for sleeping. "It ain't much," Ephraim apologized as he worked to start a fire, "but it'll keep us warm." Mabel smiled wearily. "It's shelter. That's all that matters." They shared a simple meal of bread and dried meat, huddled close to the flames. The horses and mule were tied in the lean-to outside, protected from the worst of the wind. As night deepened, the temperature plummeted further. Exhaustion settled over Mabel like a heavy blanket. She pulled her mother's wool covering tighter around her shoulders, fighting tears of weariness. Without thinking, she began to pray aloud. "Dear Lord, please give us strength for tomorrow's journey. Watch over Mama and Henry, and guide our path home. Help us protect what's right and true." Her voice faltered. To her surprise, Ephraim's deep voice joined in. "And Lord, thank you for showing me the way back, to faith, to hope." His rough hand found hers in the firelight. "To love." Mabel's heart swelled. The small cabin seemed filled with a presence she hadn't felt since her father's passing, a warm certainty that they weren't alone in their struggles. She squeezed Ephraim's hand, and they sat in peaceful silence until the fire burned low. They rose before dawn, sharing the last of Mrs. Anders's coffee. The morning was crystal clear, the snow glittering like diamonds in the early light. Their mounts, though tired, pushed steadily upward through virgin snow. Near midday, they crested a final ridge. Below them sat a small cabin, almost invisible against the white landscape. "Home," Ephraim said simply. Or it was anyway. Inside, the cabin was neat but sparse: a bed, a table, some shelves with basic supplies. Ephraim went straight to the stone hearth, kneeling to pry up one of the heavy rocks. From the space beneath, he pulled out a leather pouch, wrapped carefully in oilcloth. With trembling fingers, Mabel opened it. There lay the deed, the paper still crisp, her father's signature clear and bold at the bottom. She pressed it to her chest, tears flowing freely. He knew, she whispered. Papa knew we'd need this someday. Your father was a good man. Ephraim's voice was gentle, wise enough to prepare, kind enough to trust a stranger with his children's future. Not a stranger anymore. Mabel looked up at him through her tears. Ephraim took her hand, his calloused thumb tracing circles on her palm. Mabel, these past weeks, you've brought something back to me I thought was dead forever. Not just faith in God, but faith in love. In family, he swallowed hard. In myself. You brought something back to me too, she answered softly. Hope, and the courage to stand up for what's mine. They stood together in the quiet cabin, hands clasped, the precious deed between them. Outside, the sun broke through clouds, sending rays of light dancing across the snow-covered peaks. It was time to begin their journey home. The descent from the mountains proved treacherous. Melting snow turned the trails slick, forcing them to pick their way carefully down the rocky slopes. By late afternoon, the town of Millstone came into view, its church steeple piercing the golden sky. Ephraim led them straight to the county clerk's office, their boots leaving muddy prints on the wooden sidewalk. Inside, the clerk looked up from his ledger, startled by their determined entrance. We have the Anders deed, Ephraim announced, laying the document on the desk. The real one, saved by John Anders himself. The clerk adjusted his spectacles, studying the paper with pursed lips. Before he could speak, the door burst open. Bart Crowley stormed in, face red with rage. This is nonsense, he shouted. They're trying to pass off a forgery. Both deeds are here now, the clerk said calmly, comparing the documents side by side. And I can tell you which one's genuine. He pointed to Mabel's copy. This paper and ink match other deeds from 5 years ago. The watermark is correct. The sheriff, summoned by the commotion, stepped into the office. Ephraim turned to face him squarely. Sheriff, I can testify that Crowley's men set fire to the Anders barn and stole the original deed, he stated firmly. Henry Anders was burned in that fire, a boy of 15. The sheriff's weathered face hardened. That true, Bart. Crowley's bluster crumbled under the lawman's steady gaze. Without warning, he lunged for the door, but the sheriff caught him by the collar. Arson and theft, the sheriff declared, pulling out his handcuffs. That'll earn you some time in the territorial prison. Through the office window, a crowd had gathered. Mabel recognized faces that had once laughed at her in the mercantile. Now they nodded respectfully, shame evident in their downturned eyes. The clerk's pen scratched across paper as he officially recorded the Anders deed. Your land is secured, Miss Anders, he announced. Legal and proper. Outside, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Ephraim touched Mabel's elbow gently. Would you walk with me a spell? He asked of me. They strolled to the edge of town, where prairie grass swayed in the evening breeze. Ephraim turned to face her, his eyes full of tender certainty. Mabel, he said, taking her hands in his, I know now what I want. Not just to help you or protect you. I want to build a life with you as your husband, if you'll have me. Tears spilled down Mabel's cheeks as she squeezed his rough hands. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. Spring arrived in Colorado with a burst of wildflowers dotting the prairie. The morning air carried the sweet scent of new grass and fresh cut timber as neighbors gathered to rebuild the Anders barn. Men hammered and sawed while women laid out food on makeshift tables, their shared labor healing old wounds. The new barn rose steadily over 3 weeks, its fresh pine boards gleaming in the sunshine. Inside, lanterns hung from sturdy beams, casting warm light across the swept dirt floor. Hay bales were arranged as seats, and spring flowers decorated every corner. On the wedding day, Mabel stood before her mirror, smoothing the simple cream-colored dress she had sewn herself. The fabric was sturdy cotton, but she had added delicate lace at the collar, a gift from the mercantile owner's wife, offered with sincere apologies for past unkindness. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Anders said, pinning a sprig of wild roses in her daughter's hair. Her eyes shone with happy tears. Henry, his burned arm now healed and strong again, proudly escorted his sister toward the barn doors. Inside, the space glowed with lamplight and fellowship. Pastor Miller stood waiting, his Bible open, while Ephraim turned to watch his bride approach. The gathered townsfolk rose, their faces showing genuine warmth. Many carried gift tokens of their changed hearts. A new plow leaned against one wall, seed packets were tied with ribbons, and 2 young calves waited in a nearby pen. Ephraim's breath caught at the sight of Mabel. Her cheeks were flushed with joy, her eyes bright with certainty. When she reached his side, he took her hand gently, as if holding something precious and rare. Pastor Miller spoke of God's grace in bringing healing to broken hearts, of love that chooses and cherishes. As he blessed their union, Henry Toll Elk nodded approvingly from his place of honor near the front, seeing how the Creator's ways had brought good from pain. "I do." Ephraim's voice rang clear and strong. "I do," Mabel answered, her smile radiant. After the ceremony, as twilight softened the sky, the newlyweds stepped outside for a moment alone. Stars were beginning to appear, spreading like diamonds across the darkening Colorado heavens. The spring air was cool, but Ephraim held Mabel close, warming her. "Do you remember what I said that day in the mercantile?" he asked softly. Mabel nodded against his chest, remembering how those words had changed everything. Ephraim tilted her face up to his. "I've never wanted anyone this badly," he whispered. But now the words carried all his tenderness, all his certainty, all his love. Tears sparkled in Mabel's eyes. "And I never thought I'd be chosen," she whispered back, her voice full of wonder. Their kiss was gentle and sure, blessed by starlight and the warm glow of lanterns spilling from the barn. Behind them, voices and music mingled with the evening breeze, but they stood wrapped in their own quiet joy. The land was secure, their love was blessed, and their future stretched before them like the endless prairie sky full of promise and hope. In that moment, they were complete, chosen, and cherished, exactly as they were meant to be. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.